Hello and welcome everybody to TGIK. This is the first one that I've done in quite a while, so a huge thank you to Chris for holding down the fort while I've been so busy with other things. While we get started, so first of all, today is July 27th, and the plan today is to go over Knative, something new that was announced at GCP Next. And and so we're going to dig into that. I haven't played with it before. I've done a little bit of reading and pre-gaming just to make sure I'm not going to immediately run into any roadblocks, but that's what we're going to be doing. So for those who don't know, my name is Joe Bita. I am the CTO and founder of a startup called Heptio. We're working on bringing Kubernetes and cloud native technologies in general to a wider enterprise ecosystem. And so I do either me or Chris, or we're talking about bringing some other folks on board. We do try and do a screencast every Friday called TGI Kubernetes. That's what you're watching, where we cover new technologies in the Kubernetes world, go over and just play with things. Sometimes we do some live development. The idea being is to get an idea of watching us play with these technologies, understand them, we learn about things together. So what I love to do as I start off is say hi to everybody who's been joining me. So hopefully y'all can hear me. And I'm coming through loud and clear here. It's great to see so many folks actually joining. And then I'll spend some time going over sort of what's happened over the last week, hit some of the highlights, and then we're going to jump in. So let me look and see, man, there's a ton of folks here. So I see Sean Sanket from Naperville, Olav in Copenhagen, and yes, and folks that are not in U.S. time zones. This is probably one of the worst times to do it because it's already Friday night and or Saturday morning for you. So thanks for tuning in from all these disparate places. Let's see, we have Suresh from Hamburg, Matthew in Bristol, Chris in Detroit. How's it going, man? Marco is in the Netherlands, Joy in Richmond. Elisiano is saying happy Sysadmin Day, everyone. Saeed in London. Ralph, how's it going, Ralph? Long time, man. George is actually signed in as the Heptio account, so he can help facilitate, take notes and stuff. You can't post links into the comments here. So if there's a link that you want to share with me, you can filter that through George, and he can post that stuff into the stuff, and then we'll put it in the notes. Let's see. So. Vishwanath from Hamburg. Lamati, good to see you. We're still enjoying that honey that you sent. Keith from Scotland. Rory from go ahead. I'm sure I'm butchering it. Ed. Gift from Portland. Peter and wow, there's too many for me to go. This is awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. I don't want to spend too much time, but wow. Chile. Mariano in Barcelona. Adele in Stuttgart. So yeah, awesome. All right, and hopefully some of the folks from that have been working on Knative have been able to join us also, and they can help to make sure that if we go off the rails, we don't go too far off the rails. And so Josh from London, good to see you. And so so with that, let's just go ahead and jump in. So one of the things we've been playing around with this stuff, and I'm going to switch to my screen here, is we've been taking notes as we go. George is going to edit this stuff. And so this is what I've been using to keep track of what's happening. And then we're going to check this into a GitHub repo after the fact. And you can sort of see George taking notes as we go here. The first thing that I want to cover here, and let's see, can I just click on this? Does that work? No. Oh, I'll do this. Look at that. We can do the split preview here. Is Kubernetes won the 2018 OSCON Most Impact Award. So this is really, really interesting and exciting. So Kelsey reached out to me a little bit before. I wasn't able to make it to OSCON, saying that they were going to do this. They were able to get a lot of folks on stage. I think Brendan was there. Brian and Tim, who were super early with the project, were there. And it feels really good to see everybody recognize the community and the impact that everybody has had there. One of the things, and I haven't heard an answer, and maybe it's in here, is that there was a physical award, and I'm wondering where and how that award ends up, right? Because the community doesn't have an office or a trophy case, so I'm not quite sure what happened there. I'd be really interested to hear about that. So that's really exciting. I haven't had a chance, and we should do a TGIK on this, but the Kubernetes is now part of Docker Desktop, and so it's installed in general. It's a pretty big download, but that actually is really interesting too. Yeah, slice the award up in tiny pieces. We need to shard it and then send it out. Everybody gets something. So there's this cool thing, and I bought every single one of these. It's called the Mini Museum, and it's a Kickstarter, and I think they're doing a Kickstarter now. And what is it? It's a block of lucite with these itty bitty samples of cool stuff. So it's like a mini museum that you can hold. And then each of these things aren't cheap, but they're really cool. And so then you can actually look at these things in 3D. So what we should do is do one of those with the award, where we create little slices of these things and ship them out to everybody. All right. Oh yeah, like the Stanley Cup where it gets passed around. It can do a world tour. That'd be fun too. All right, so Docker Desktop. I haven't had a chance to play with this. I've been using Docker sort of just in the sort of pure Docker client form. I know that those folks have been hard at work in creating a desktop experience around this. My understanding is this is a little bit of a sort of mini cube alternative. It'd be interesting to maybe take some time at some point and do a little bit of compare and contrast with the Docker Desktop stuff. And then at some point, maybe look at the Docker Enterprise stuff, but I'm not quite sure that that's something that, we generally try and focus on open source stuff on TGIK, and so I'm not sure that there's a open source sort of alternative or sort of skew of that we could play with. But it'd be interesting to look at the Docker Community Edition, the install thing, and actually see how they implement Kubernetes. All right, let's see. Yeah, chopping up a distributed system, exactly. And then, and then stuff announced at Google Next. I think there's two. So Lamati says, okay, so congrats on the 3-year anniversary. And then do you have a favorite moment during development of Kubernetes that you can share? Okay, the CNCF has the award? I'm not sure about that. Yeah, Paris is saying that they're holding on to it. Does anybody in the CNCF actually work on Kubernetes? I mean, I don't know, but I guess that's probably as good a place as any. So two things that I think are really interesting to folks coming out of Google Next is there's GKE on-prem. This is in a closed alpha right now, and this is the idea of using a lot of the techniques and management that goes into GKE for actually managing stuff that's running on premise. Out the gate, this is going to be running on top of VMware. So there's this assumption that you're running on top of something that can be automated. So it's not really bare metal. It is on-prem. So there's early access going on there, but I think the idea is to provide a consistent experience and management across these things. They're talking about managing both Kubernetes and Istio on top of this. So that's really interesting, integrating with things like Stack Driver and such in the console. So yeah, so that's cool. I think it's still early. I haven't been unfortunately, I wasn't able to watch any of the sessions at GCP Next. I wasn't down there, and I haven't had a time to catch up on the recordings. But I know they had some sessions on that where they go into a little bit more detail. And so that's super cool. And so, so Philippe from Paris, and then Matt Moore, who's working on the Knative team, says he's hello from Knative. He is just distributed. He is truly cloud native. He is living in the cloud. Thanks for joining us, Matt. All right, and then we're going to talk about Knative today, so we'll go into a lot of that. That was a big deal at GCP Next also. They announced a whole bunch of other stuff too, but I haven't, again, I wasn't there, so I wasn't able to actually keep up with all the announcements. And then the final announcement, and is that the CFP, so this is call for papers or proposals, like if you want to talk at KubeCon here in Seattle in December, you got to get a proposal in by December or by August 12th is when the CFP closes. And if you have experience in any shape with Kubernetes, I would really encourage you to submit your proposal if you have something interesting to talk about. You don't need to be an expert here. I think your experiences, what worked, what didn't work, being able to sort of share your learnings wherever you're at in the Kubernetes journey is I think interesting for folks. And so I think one of the ones at KubeCon EU that I think a lot of folks got a lot out of is Kate, who's one of our engineers here who primarily does a lot of front-end stuff, was brand new to Kubernetes. She shared her experience coming from sort of this front-end mindset into the Kubernetes world, where it was intimidating, the resources that she used, and how she started coming up to speed on all this stuff. And so I think, even if you don't have that deep expertise, we really want all sorts of different points of view when it comes to KubeCon. All right, let me catch up on the comments here. So, Nadir in London, good to see you. Dan from Sysdig. I don't know where Sysdig is. Is that a city? No, I think it's probably San Francisco, I'm assuming. Sean submitted your CFP. Awesome. And then Pablo says, what do you think of Knative plus Kong, for example, or Nginx? We're going to get into that a little bit. I think one of the things that we'll see is that because Knative depends on Istio, it does not integrate with sort of the ecosystem of Ingress systems that are out there. This is one of the things that, like, Istio defines its own Ingress systems and doesn't have a pluggable model for that stuff. And, as we start looking at this, what we'll find is that things like Cert Manager, which does have a way to, say, do things like grab TLS certificates using the HTTP challenge using Let's Encrypt, that doesn't work well with Istio as things are today. So I'm not sure that like Knative plus Nginx actually makes sense at this point because of that Istio dependency that they've taken. And that's something that we'll definitely dig into as we go. Okay, Adobe in New York City. So the complex split. So fun fact, the Google office here in Seattle, in Fremont, which is not a town in California, it's a neighborhood in Seattle, actually is right next to the Adobe offices here. And they have this beautiful courtyard that I was always waiting for Adobe to move out so that we could actually move into that and get that courtyard, but I don't think it's actually happened yet. So, Saptech from Seattle, working for AWS, awesome. And then Jonathan from SAP in Vancouver. Yes, Fremont is the center of the universe, exactly. All right, so that is the announcements here of what we're going through. And then George pulled up a video of Kate's talk. If you want to get that idea of, like, wherever you are in your journey, that's in the notes here. All right, so yes, and thanks to all the Knative. How do we pronounce Knative? We need Chris here to help us come up with is the K silent? Is Knative? Is it Nateve? Knative? All right, we'll come up with a fun pronunciation. Adnan, good to see you from Bitnami. Yeah, you say Knative. We'll make up our own mind, Matt. Don't worry. Native. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to start with the home page for Knative. And I think one of the things that actually I had to go through as I was wrapping my head around what's really happening here is I think a lot of the hype around this, a lot of the way that people have been talking about it, the marketing is really diverged from the underlying implementation. And I think, I think I want to really dig into and sort of look at that difference and understand where is this stuff at. And I think that when we look at sort of the marketing page, which is really what this homepage is, we're going to get an idea of sort of what is this thing going to look like sort of in the fullness of time. And so the first thing here is that it's Knative and it's built on Kubernetes and Istio, and it's part of Google Cloud. So I'm looking at sort of the title here in the Antoine from Paris. Good to see you. And so I think this is interesting. You look at this, and I saw this come up, and I'm like, is the headline that this is built on Kubernetes and Istio, or is the headline that it's a platform to build and deploy manage modern serverless workloads? What does serverless mean? So there's this huge argument about what serverless means, because one of the other things that we probably should have mentioned that was introduced at GCP Next is, and I haven't had a chance to look at this at all, is serverless containers. And so serverless containers are essentially containers for Kubernetes, or that you can access through Kubernetes without having to manage the node. So in some ways, that's like AWS Fargate or the Azure container instances. Well, those are serverless also. Those are called, so like do we have serverless running on serverless? So like serverless is kind of meaning over time. So what we'll do is we'll try and decode what's actually here instead of buzzwords like serverless. So there's a bunch of primitives. It's aimed at developers. There's a lot of development platforms here, flexibility and control. I think this is an interesting one, is that because Knative is built as a layer on top of Kubernetes, what that means is that you can actually deploy it in a whole bunch of different places. And I think as we look at like the value of a platform is proportional to the ubiquity of that platform. And so something being open like this means that over time, it's going to be available in a lot of places, and then you'll get that network effect around value. And I think we've seen that with the journey of Kubernetes. And I think the idea, and reading between the lines, is that Google is really hoping that Knative actually forms that same journey. So operator friendly also. So developer versus operator, that's an interesting thing to think about. We'll talk about some of that and some of the things that I think are core scenarios that aren't enabled yet from what I've seen, and actually are, in terms of operation, especially as you start looking at multi-tenancy, multi-team, and these types of things. And then serverless workloads, and I think in this case what they mean is serverless, they mean like Lambda, function as a service, this idea of code to URL with very little machinations in between. So then the Knative features, there's serving, build, and events. And so I like this breakdown and the componentization that's coming here, is that really, you've taken sort of what makes up a PaaS or a function as a service, and they've exploded it into these component parts. I'm really hoping as we dig into these that these things can be used independently. And it's not, sort of some sort of hairball. And I think that there's hints that that's the case. And so we're going to be, we'll see how much we can get through in the sort of hour and a half that we're going to spend with TGIK. But I'm going to start with the serving stuff and then look at build, and then maybe if we have time we can get to some of the eventing stuff. My understanding from interacting with some folks on Twitter that there's been sort of the most sort of road miles on the serving and then build and then eventing. So eventing is the newest out of these things. And then like another feature is serverless add-on for GKE. Is that a feature of Knative or is that a GKE thing? And I think this is one of those things where it's like the blending of like what Knative is versus what is a Google product, what is open and what's not open is, I think, confused because this is really a Google Cloud marketing page. And then we got a blurb, and then there's instructions for installing docs, developer resources, build templates, and eventing. So we'll try and dig into that stuff. And then community here. And so I'm going to go through some of this stuff and why this stuff matters. So extensible at the top and pluggable at the bottom. Okay, so that's what Mark is saying from one of the GCP Next sessions. Hopefully, we can actually see if we can put that into action. Okay, so the first thing here, I'm going to reorder my tabs, is that there's a mailing list that you can join called Knative Users. There are absolutely zero, as of this, messages on that thing. I did join it, but it's still important. You still want to join it. And the reason you want to join it, and this is a little bit of inside baseball, is that obviously Google and Googlers are... there's also Knative Dev. I was going to call attention to that, Matt, but you have to apply to actually be a member of Knative Dev. And so I'm like, I don't know, and there was no documentation around who could apply and what the approval process was, and sort of so I was just assuming that was for the folks in the in crowd. So maybe getting some documentation around that, or maybe that's in the contributing guidelines. Is Knative Dev here? No, it's not in the contributor. So I'm not quite sure what the protocol is around Knative Dev. But in any case, so Knative Users has zero, but this stuff is important because the way Google works is that they use G Suite, like everybody else, with Google Drive and all that. But they have it locked down more than a lot of other users. And so Googlers cannot share a Google Doc with the world. They cannot make it public. They can share it with external people, but they can't make it public like you can with your consumer Google Doc, or, if you actually own your own G Suite, as an administrator, you can actually set different levels there. This creates a real problem in the Kubernetes world, and I assume creates a problem in the Knative world, where Googlers will want to create a doc, share it with the community. They can't open it up to the world, so they have to explicitly pick some folks to share it with. And the hack that we've come around with is to share it with a mailing list, because you can share it with a Google group because it's part of the Google world. And so if they create a doc, they'll share it by default read-only with Knative users. And so by joining Knative users, you actually then will be put on the ACL so that you can access the design docs and that stuff. Okay, so Keith says Knative Dev isn't for the in crowd, they let me in. Okay, so then there's Knative Dev here that you can apply to join. I'm going to do this. I'm going to say link it to my heptio.com profile. Say, please let me in. Apply to join group. All right. So there we go. So there's Knative Dev also then, which I assume if I get in actually has some discussion topics. Okay. Now the next thing that we got going on here is that there's a Slack, and the Slack looks like it's pretty active, and there's things that are happening. And so I joined and said hi to folks. Let's see. Okay, and then Knative Dev gets you invites to the community meetings until it gets too big, and then Google Calendar breaks down with, click everybody, look busy. And so now the goal, my understanding, is that eventually you'll be able to go to slack.knative.dev. Let me linkify that. Does that work? Slack.knative.dev. But last I checked, that wasn't hooked up yet. So there, no, wait, where did that go? What's going on here? I have to do HTTPs. All right, look at that. George is working on it. Okay, so that's not up yet. So they'll get that set up, because Slack makes you sort of like you have to host this thing, and oftentimes people host it on Heroku, so maybe they'll host it on Knative. But for now, there's a link that's in the notes here that you can use. This was shared on Twitter that'll get you access to the Slack channel, and so they're going to be getting there. All right, and then and so that's what we got here, and then we'll go ahead and there's the Knative GitHub organization. So another thing, and this is again the difference between the marketing world and the open source world, is that there's a logo for Knative, and there's a K and an N, and I'll deconstruct this for you in a second. But what you'll find is that that logo doesn't show up anywhere here on the Knative landing page. So what this tells me is that the branding people at Google hate the logo. and that's good, I think, in some ways, because you want the open source community to have its own identity. You want to create some white space, I think, between the corporate overlords and the open source community. All right, so Vile, who I worked with at Google before I left, so this was years ago, messaged me privately and wanted to make sure that I was in on the joke. So I'm going to share it with you all. What you'll notice is that Knative, there's a heptagon with 7 sides, and then the N is inside this other shape. And you're looking at this going like, that's more than 7 sides, what's going on there? And I started counting it, and then I lost count because it's actually more than 3. And that's actually a 9-sided, it's a ninagon. I mean, what do you call a 9-sided thing? And so we have 7 and 9. And this is a really in joke that harkens back to the original name of Kubernetes before we went public. And this was Brendan's thing. We called it 7 of 9 originally. A nonagon? Nonagon. Exactly. It's K-nonagon. Yeah, exactly. And so that's awesome. K-nonagon. And so originally Kubernetes was called 7 of 9 because we wanted to create a friendlier Borg. And then that got shortened to Project 7. We couldn't go public with that. And so then Kubernetes was like picked out of desperation. But when we did the logo, in just a way to sort of like harken back to that, it ended up with being a 7-sided thing. One of the things that we actually found out out of this is that, the seven-sided thing is actually common in nautical because of like seven seas. And so it's not uncommon to see a seven-spoke steering wheel on a ship, or the Maersk logo actually is a seven-pointed star. And so, yeah. So that's fun. So that's the Knative logo there. All right, oh, look at this, but Kubernetes-based platform to build, deploy, and manage modern serverless workloads. Oh, it matches up. Look at that. There's some consistency here. Check it out. I wonder when that changed. Anyway, so let's dig into the docs. I like that there's a docs repo from the start. The docs are actually looking pretty good. So that is something really interesting. And so Joe's saying that They May Be Giants did a song about polygons from a triangle up to a nonagon. So that's fun. Okay, so there's a lot going on here, and there's a diagram, but the idea is that, there's Knative, and you can integrate with other stuff, and there's an API for developers, and this uses Kubernetes. And so this is like a grade A architecture diagram here. But there's Istio in the mix and stuff, so that's cool. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to try and get this thing installed and then start playing with it. And so when I first started looking at this right after it was announced, there was just these instructions. And I'm like, but I don't use any of these, right? I mean, we do a lot of stuff with AWS because that's where so many of our customers are. And that would be either EKS, and it turns out that there's a problem with Istio 1.0 and the container injection with EKS. I think folks are talking about and working through that. But we'll also install into AWS with kubeadmin using our quick start. That's generally what I use when I'm playing around with stuff. So I'm like, it's really sad that there's no like generic Kubernetes instructions, because I think we want to get to the point where it's like you don't have to have special instructions for different platforms, or at least largely the bulk of the instructions are the same. I called this out, and within 10 minutes, Evan, who I used to work with also at Google, had a PR to actually have some generic Kubernetes install instructions. So that's what we're going to be going through, since I'm not using any of those up there. And this is going to walk us through the general stuff. Now the problem, John, with EKS, and I think if folks have a pointer to the bug number, they can dig into this. Is that EKS with the API server does not have the mutating admission controllers enabled. That's a beta feature. You have to go ahead and enable that. And the EKS folks haven't enabled it, and so that means that the automatic injection doesn't happen. And the instructions here say that you have to set Istio up for automatic injection. I don't know if there's a way to run it with manual injection. It doesn't look like that. And we'll go into a little bit about sort of what the injection looks like and sort of dig into that a bit. Okay, there's a little bit of chatter here about will Knative make it to the CNCF or not, and there's a little bit of not clear what's going to happen here. So DeWitt is maybe the right person to talk to. Okay, and then Matt's saying that they use the mutating webhooks for defaulting with, I assume, with CRDs too, and so that won't work also. And so this is generally a downside when you use managed systems like GKE or AKS or EKS, is that there will be a set of configurables that you won't have access to. And over time in the Kubernetes world, we're working as it makes sense to pull those things out so that they can be configured within the cluster. But I think there's going to be some stuff like, enabling some of these advanced features that may be locked down, maybe won't make it to that being able to change on the fly type of thing. Like one of the things we're working on with Heptio is making it so that you can install audit log hooks dynamically, right? Instead of actually only having to do that via the command line. Similar things that when you set up authorization and authentication with Kubernetes, that can only be done with access to the API server. And so you can't go to something like GKE and say, hey, I want to use my own LDAP to actually, do the authentication to the Kubernetes cluster there, because GKE doesn't give you access to those tunables. And so it's one of those lockdown access to tunables that makes this be difficult with EKS. The rule for these types of features, at least with GKE, I believe, is that anything that's beta gets turned on with GKE. You can get the alpha features turned on, but it's a sort of experimental cluster that won't be upgradable, and I think self-destructs after a while. So if you want access to an alpha feature, you can get it with GKE, but there's some safeguards to make sure that you don't take that stuff into production. All right, a little bit of an aside there. Okay, so pretty much what we do is we install Istio, we install Knative serving, and then we deploy an app. All right, so let's go and do that. Now, those of you, so Sean's saying self-destructs after a month for alpha clusters in GKE, but at least it gives you a way to sort of get access to these features early on. So one of the things I like to do when I'm doing anything on TGIK is like kube control apply -f is essentially like, curl pipe to sudo bash going on. So I at least like to look under the covers to see what's happening here. And usually what I like to do is dig into all these things and look at all the objects that are coming into play, and then also look at the RBAC rules that are being configured for these things. Because there's a question of like, hey, is this thing essentially acting as root within essentially acting as root within my infrastructure, or is this something that can be safely installed into a namespace independently? And what you'll find here is that Istio definitely needs to be root, and I believe that the instructions for Knative essentially require root also. There is a lot of YAML here, and so I don't think I'll be able to make it through all of this. Istio's gotten bigger since last I looked, and I think I should probably, Istio also made it to 1.0. They announced that at GCP Next, which it's odd that they didn't do it at OSCON since open source project, but I guess, again, that relationship is tied there. So obviously the, GCP Next was the place where they announced 1.0 of Istio. So the first thing to notice here is that we're installing Istio, but we're not installing stock Istio. So there's a version of Istio that has been patched to work with Knative. But those patches, I was looking at this, those patches are very, very narrow, so that hopefully that won't be a big deal for folks who have Istio that's running in other ways. There's a question in the chat, can you deploy to on-prem Kubernetes? I don't see any reason why not. There's a question, I think, in terms of whether you need any persistent volumes, which can often be a sticking point when going on-prem, but it's something that we can look into when we look at the Knative install. And so Matt says, I believe that's because they don't have a non-Helm install anymore. A lot of the pattern that we're seeing here is that a lot of folks are starting to use Helm to generate YAML that then they check in and apply elsewhere, because there's this Helm Template command that essentially uses the Helm templating engine, which is like essentially just Golang templates without activating Tiller. And so a lot of the sort of workflow issues and the security concerns really come in when you start looking at Tiller. And so we'll see that happens here also. So all these heritage is Tiller. So this is obviously generated from Helm, but it's generated and then written to disk. What we're going to see here is that there's two things that are marked as patches. One of these things is creating the Istio system namespace, which is totally fine. Helm, I think when you do that Helm template stuff, it doesn't include the namespace there because it assumes that that'll be there, and then that's done out of band of this. And then there's another patch about when running the Istio proxy. And this is a template inside a template. So this is the thing that makes this stuff so confusing. This symbol here is essentially take everything at this indent level and treat it as a string. So it's essentially YAML embedded as a string into other YAML, and so you don't get validation as you do that. And then we have more YAML embedded as a string inside of YAML. So we have YAML that's stringified inside of YAML that's stringified inside of YAML. And then Istio has its own templating engine that it uses for its templates, but it uses square brackets because otherwise it would conflict with the curly braces that Helm uses with the stuff. So this stuff gets pretty Baroque pretty fast. And it's clear that very few folks sort of human read this. But the other patch here is that when you're injecting the sidecar, I believe the Istio proxy, which is essentially the proxy sidecar, when you're injecting that, which ends up being Envoy, when you're injecting that into a pod, and we'll get into that flow, they had to add a pre-stop hook here to make sure that it could gracefully exit. Otherwise, I looked up this bug here. Otherwise, what happens is some requests were getting dropped. And so sort of fast scaling with Istio ends up being a corner case that needs to be solved there. Yeah, and so Lamati says, yeah, so it looks like Tiller is going to sunset in Helm 3 if the current proposal. Yeah, that is, yeah, that's the proposal. We'll have to see how that plays out. It's still very, very early days for Helm 3. And so I'm not sure where that is. Okay, so so first of all, we'll go through and, so this is 4,100 lines of YAML. I can't go through all of this, but essentially there's like a namespace, there's a bunch of config maps. The config maps end up being validating like configurations for admission things and these things. So it ends up being like dynamic config for these other things. And so, yeah, it ends up being relatively like it's very meta, right? And so this, I got to be honest, like this, and I think when we start looking at the Knative install, this starts to feel like the pile of bash and salt that I built for first installing Kubernetes. There was this assumption early on that, hey, if we can do a one-line install, then everybody's going to be happy and it's going to be great. That definitely didn't work for Kubernetes because we found that the environments that we're installing in were different enough that we needed to be able to we really needed to be able to customize and manage that stuff over time. So that whole cube up stuff that I was involved with was there were a lot of lessons to be learned there. Let's just put it that way. I worry when I see this much YAML with this much sort of meta configuration where we have YAML inside of YAML that actually has sub objects and stuff like that. It's pretty interesting. But anyways, this is a validating webhook configuration that gets installed for doing validating webhooks for Istio. There's one for admitting for Pilot, and that's looking at a bunch of stuff. And then there's another one admitting for Mixer. And I had no idea that there were this many CRDs that Istio actually defined. And they're all in one API group, which means that like there's Stack Driver and SolarWind, and it's kind of interesting to see all this stuff glommed together there. But in any case, so I think this is a description for installing webhooks. This is a config map that has nothing in it called mapping.conf. We have another one, which is Istio Mixer Custom Resources. And so these are CRDs that get defined, I guess. Oh, no, these are So once the CRDs are defined, these are ones that get created, I guess. So it's essentially instead of sequencing these things, there's something else that actually goes ahead and creates these CRDs. And so some of this is an attribute manifest. I don't know what that is. And so we have a list of YAML embedded as a data item in a config map. Yeah. Matt's like, okay, so could KSONNET help here? Perhaps. I don't know. This is what I would love to see, and I think just taking a step back for something like this, one of the things that Google had internally was a system called NPM where you could take a bunch of data files and you could version it similar to the way that you could version and there's a public talk on this, so I can say the words NPM. And you can version that and distribute it similar to the way that we deal with container images today. And so I would love to see when you get like config maps that are this big, we should really view that as sort of a versionable signed tarball that gets referenced, right? Because I think at some point you just have too much that you can't see the structure of what's going on here. And this has to be machine generated to pull all this stuff together. And I think it's just, it ends up being, assembly code. It's like trying to decode WebAssembly. So yeah. Yeah, an episode on Istio 1.0 would definitely be good. Thank you for that. And then there's this thing called standard IO. Here's an access log one that gets installed. Here's TCP access log. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. And then there's like request count, request duration. These are metrics. Woo, man. So there's a whole bunch of config for Istio that actually gets bundled up into config maps. There's Prometheus here. And this is like this is a Prometheus that's part of the Istio namespace. So I'm like, is this different from like a Prometheus operator? Is like Prometheus operator built into Istio? Is Istio the system D of Kubernetes? Okay, so there's a whole bunch of here that's configuring Istio. I'm not going to go through this. I'm just going to YOLO it. Hopefully it doesn't break. I do want to see, like, let's look at the kinds that we're doing here. So I'm going to do grep kind istio.yaml. And so we're going to get through a bunch of these. Okay, and then there's custom resource definitions that get installed. And then we get down to cluster roles. And we have one for the mixer. We have, and then there's a binding. Okay, here's a job. That's a post install hook to do some stuff with. Yeah, all right. So, yeah, so one of the interesting things is that when you do use Tiller, it can actually do workflow-like things. I'm not sure how that gets flattened out when you do the Helm template stuff. Yeah, so, okay, so, and then there's service accounts. So there's a whole bunch of here. My guess is that, and then, we have Bash in here, sweet. It's not DevOps without Bash. All right, and so you can go into the Istio chart and actually see where all these things are being pulled from, all the different files. So we're not gonna go through that. But when we do get down, there's services, deployment services. So let's, kind service. The one thing I do want to check is just to make sure that we're not going to get called out with the way that type equals load balancer services work with AWS. I want to be able to actually dig into that. So we have, so this is a service without a type. So it's cluster IP. Here's another cluster IP service. This is for the Egress Gateway. The Ingress Gateway, this is type equals load balancer. It doesn't have any annotations on it, so it's not doing anything too funky. Because when you're using GCP or GCE type equals load balancers, you can do some stuff to essentially preserve the incoming IP address. Or use the proxy protocol or anything like that. And I just wanted to make sure that we weren't seeing any of that stuff going on here. And we're not doing anything special. It's just a regular old type equals load balancer. If you are running this on-prem and you don't have a load balancer installed, great. You found Dinah's talk on the NPM stuff. That was from like forever ago, but it's a fascinating talk on NPM. I also referenced that on a blog post on my blog a while ago. So George will get that added in. And then, yeah, so you can change this to a node port, and then however you get to the node port, things will continue to work. So that's probably something that you want to be aware of if you're going through and using this with on-prem. And let's see, I'm guessing that that's the only thing that's type equals load balancer. And then we have a deployment for the Prometheus, StatsD Prometheus bridge here. Because Envoy only pushes metrics using StatsD. And Prometheus pulls metrics using its sort of HTTP endpoint thing. And so you need something that essentially collects and publishes these things. And so that ends up being things like this stats bridge here. And then we have another one for Pilot, another service for Citadel, which is the Istio monitoring dashboard, I believe. There's a service for the sidecar injector. There's Istio Galley. I have no idea what Istio Galley is. It has something to do with certs. And then we have Istio Egress Gateway, which is a deployment. This is actually invalid YAML because it has a duplicate of the app thing here. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that so it doesn't make stuff look bad. Galley is the new Istio auth. Okay. Yeah, so Egress Gateway comes with a bunch of stuff. And then we have the Ingress Gateway again. So Ingress Gateway is essentially like an ingress. And so it's a bridge from the outside world into other things. And so it has a bunch of stuff going on here. And this is fascinating. So the Istio stuff, the Istio deployments don't have requests on their stuff. So CPU we have as a request, but there's no RAM request there, which means that there's a chance that this stuff goes down if you actually stress your cluster too much. Now, there's a good chance that when you're running, well, no, it's creating its own namespace, so you're not going to get, by default, any sort of default quota. With the default namespace on GKE, they do add a default quota so that you actually get this stuff by default, but I don't believe that'll happen with these other ones. And so if you were going to run this stuff in production, you probably want to make sure that you put limits on all that and you set up the right pod security policies and quota defaults. I forget what that object's called on all of your namespaces, including these. Okay, so, and then here's Mixer, and we got a bunch of affinity stuff and all that. And this again also just has CPU. It doesn't talk about RAM. So that's really interesting. 10 millicPUs, and then there's telemetry. Wow, there's a lot going on here. Okay, so YOLO, kube control version. I have something running on AWS using our quick start. I'm running 193 here, and it's pretty plain vanilla Kubernetes. So let's keep our fingers crossed. Kube control apply -f istio.yaml. Ooh, look at that go. Okay, so nothing barfed. So that's good. And because I knew that we were installing a lot of stuff, I have like 5 nodes here. So we have 5 nodes running. So you sure you deleted the right duplicate label there, Joe? Could be pretty wonky with that deployment otherwise. You know what? That particular label, my guess is here, and I'll go through and I'm happy to update it, but that was a label on the top level deployment. And this is something that Helm tends to add. This is like, because deployment is kind of the top level, there's generally nothing that is using that label to key off of. I think maybe it might be for like monitoring and stuff if you're using Prometheus against it, but like we can go through and let's see if while we wait for everything to come up, we'll look for, that was Istio-egress gateway. Now that does get actually put on, that is the app that gets, okay, so it's that one. I wonder, oh man, and there's more stuff broken. Well, let's see, we'll see if, here's what I'll do is I will download it again so we have an unpatched version even though it's bad YAML. We'll apply it again, that should fix all that stuff. And then we'll do kube control, get pods, all namespaces. All right, so we got a lot of stuff coming up here now. All right, so Pablo's saying you knew the Helm install with install Kubernetes Helm Istio namespace Istio system. So we could go ahead and do that also. But I don't have Tiller installed in this thing, and I try to avoid installing Tiller because it's really difficult to install it in a secure way. So that's something that I try and be careful about. Okay. Yeah, I don't know which one wins. It's invalid YAML when you actually have the duplicate key, but apparently the Kubernetes YAML parser doesn't seem to care. Okay, so it looks like all this stuff is up. We'll do -n istio system get services wide, and what we'll see is the only service that's a load balancer here. This is now on GCP. When you allocate a load balancer, because Google networking is pretty awesome, you get one IP address that actually works for that. What happens is with ELBs, and by default use the classic ELBs at Google. I mean with the AWS provider, cloud provider. And I haven't played around with this yet, there is support that's been coming down the pike for NLBs, which are essentially their different type of load balancer. And with that, you'll go ahead and get you'll get an IP address similar to Google, I believe. But anyways, this ends up being a CNAME, and you want to make sure that you refer to this when you actually do things versus actually referring to the IP addresses that are underneath this, because those will change over time as Amazon essentially rotates the VMs that are implementing this load balancer behind the scenes. Okay, so, and then somebody says get CRDs. Whoa. Istio installs a lot of CRDs. They are totally there for CRDs. We got OPAs. We got NoOps. I don't even know what those are. NoOpCat. That's her CRD. Deniers. Circonuses. I have no idea. Check nothings. I have no idea what all this stuff is. Wow, there's a lot there. Okay, so that's a different episode. Okay, now let's do the same thing with, and I'll try and move faster here because I think my point here is made. But we're going to look at Knative. Okay, the Knative stuff is 500K of YAML. So it's even bigger than Istio, which I'm really surprised with. And wow, it just keeps going. And so, and it's 17,000 lines of YAML. Now, I started looking at this, and I haven't had a chance to totally deconstruct it. And a lot of it is things like we have like a dashboard here. And so this ends up being like a big JSON file that gets encoded, I believe, into a config map. And so that ends up being a lot of lines, but I don't like this pattern. I mean, once you get past like 12 lines in a config map, we really need a better solution. I think we really need something like NPM in Kubernetes to be able to manage this. Because like, look at this, I'm still in that same config map. Now there's like a 1 megabyte limit for config maps, so they haven't actually gone there yet. And so this is a config map, and the metadata here tells me that this was not generated with Helm, so these guys are not using Helm here. And then the last thing, and this is, I think, there's a little bit of confusing here because I start looking, and the first thing I see here is that there's a cluster role for build, but really what we're doing is it says installing Knative serving. So my guess is that what I'm looking at there is the full meal deal of Knative, just not serving. And so, I mean, I would love to see, these things seem more pluggable so that I can install serving, I can install build. Does build really need Istio? Can I do build without Istio? Those types of things so that we can really look to see, how can we make this stuff be more pluggable and feel like it's not one big thing? All right, so then the other thing, I forgot to do this, is that what I need to do, I think those are all up and running. Oh, okay, I need to do this. So I'm not gonna, let's go that. How many things do we have? Woo. Wow, that's a lot of stuff. Okay. Kube control, all namespaces, get deployments. Wait, what did I do? There's like something weird here where I have to do kube control, all namespaces. If I put it there, it gets confused. It might be a kube control bug. Okay. Yeah, it has to be at the end. I wouldn't expect it to have to be at the end. So you are working on splitting it. And okay, so I'm looking at here. So Matt's saying like 90% is telemetry and stuff. You can do this thing where it's no monitoring that actually will be a version that's a lot smaller. Working on splitting it. Okay, cool. So what do we got here? So we have a monitoring namespace, but this isn't marked like Knative monitoring. This is just monitoring. And so is this installed for the entire cluster? Is this installed just for the stuff that Knative is doing? So I'm a little bit confused for like what this monitoring is for here. Because when we looked at the 3 components, monitoring wasn't one of them. Okay, and then like it's installing FluentD and a node exporter on every single one of my nodes. And so get daemon set FluentD ds. And so this thing, oh, it's doing like host paths and stuff to be able to do this. Okay, so this isn't cool. I mean, just to be clear, because like this is some serious like, you know, cluster level stuff that you're mucking with here. Wait, is this may not be, is this Knative? FluentD daemon set. Okay, yeah, it is. Yeah, I understand what it's doing, that it's exporting container logs for everything in the cluster, and that's great. But I think, you know, we got to recognize, and I think this is something that, like folks who are really running Kubernetes, they already have solutions for some of this stuff, and figuring out how to integrate with that versus just whacking that stuff in there is something that I think should really be well documented and probably broken out, because, you know, like there are like a lot of different ways that people think about collecting logs. Yeah, and it was unexpected that it was going to install a daemon set that was going to start mucking around with host paths. So that's interesting. Okay, but it looks like it actually got on there. So maybe that stuff is up and running. And then we're going to go through, and this one says just look at native serving. Oh wait, I don't have Knative. What? Did it not get? I went and installed this. Deployment extensions, like, oh, there's Zipkin too? Whew. Okay. What's going on here? Is stuff not launching? All right, so, oh, I know what's going on here. And we're going to have to go through and fix this. Okay, so we have Knative serving. Let's look at the activate. Oh, you know, okay, so get deployment activator. I probably am hitting that issue. So desired, current, up to date. So that's not launching. Let's do a describe. Scaling replica set. So this thing, my guess, all right, this is getting the sidecar injection, and the sidecar injection is actually, is probably failing. I thought that we had that turned on, but apparently we don't. Kubernetes 1.10 enable, what do we want to enable? Mutating web admission controllers. Enable admission plugins. So we're going to need those. Yeah, so it's launching, but it's not there. Did you miss the Istio label command after installing Istio? The Istio label command, we're going to have to do that on the default namespace. We haven't gotten there yet. I did know that. So the sidecar injector pods aren't running. So that's actually the thing that's actually we're having trouble with. So I'll teach you all how to add this then. What is it? Is it Istio system? So we have the sidecar injector here is not running. Kube control get describe deployment Istios. Istio is kind of a little bit redundant there. So it failed create. Why are we failing? So liveness and readiness actually ended up, well, there's an exec there for this. So why did this fail? Did it scaled up? So replica failure, failed create, old replica set. Okay, so we'll go through. Oh. Replica set of internal error occurred, failed calling admission web. Okay, so yeah, so we don't have that stuff set up. So what we're going to do is we're going to I have this thing that helps me SSH into the master. So we're going to go to Etsy, Kubernetes, and then we'll look at manifests, and then we're going to do nano cube API server.yaml. Oh, I am not. X. Sudo nano cube API server.yaml. So we got to fix this because we don't have that admission controller enabled. So what do we have? We have namespace lifecycle, limit ranger, service account, persistent volumes, validate. And we do have a mutating admission webhook enabled here. Yeah, okay, so this is like we have this, but it's still not working. All right, so let's see what people have as answers here. Because I thought the issue there was the mutating webhook stuff. So we have okay, the minikube instructions specify the following admission controls. Limit ranger, namespace exists, namespace lifecycle, resource quota, service account, default storage class, mutating admission controller webhook. So I think we have all of those there. Oh, shoot, this thing again. So we have namespace lifecycle, limit ranger, service account, persistent volume label, default storage class, default toleration. And I wish that, I don't know, seconds, node restriction, mutating admission webhook, validating admission webhook, and resource quota. Are we missing namespace exists? What does namespace exists? Checks all requests on namespace resources other than namespace itself. The namespace reference in the request doesn't exist. The request is rejected. Okay, that shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, that is weird why this thing is failing. Okay, so let's try and debug this real quick because we're dead in the water unless we can fix this. So there was Knative, EKS, admission control. There was an issue. Let's see if Google finds the issue. Here, this must be, well, this is the old issues repo. There's a new issues repo. Did they declare it? Okay, so COPS isn't working either, but COPS, that's probably 1.9, because COPS at least, let's look at this issue here. Kube-control label namespace default. So yeah, so doing the kube-control label namespace default, we're going to have to do that before we actually start doing stuff in default, but that only affects stuff in the default namespace, so that's not the issue that we're running into here. And this isn't an EKS issue because like we're not using EKS, we're using kubeadmin, so we're not doing anything too fancy here. Okay, so here, namespace lifecycle, limit range, service count, persistent volume, only defaults, default toleration sections, mutating, validating, resource quota, node restriction, and priority. Yeah, this isn't only an EKS issue. Maybe because the duplicate app entry was deleted in Istio YAML when it was first applied. I don't think that was it because I actually, I mean, we can go ahead and we can blow it away. I'm happy to do that. So let's do kube control delete -f istio. Well, we'll blow it all away here. It's going to take a while to clean up everything because actually deleting namespaces can be really slow sometimes. So we'll actually see. And we'll make sure that Istio is up first before we actually do any of this stuff because I don't want to. Deployment extensions, webhook not found. So like there was some stuff that didn't. All right, well, and then we'll do Istio. All right, so kube control get namespaces. What do we have? So Istio system is terminating. Okay, so I now have. Is there a problem where okay, so it was, oh, so this is fascinating. Okay, so did we change the end dot stuff in resolve conf? Or maybe it's an issue with core DNS versus kube DNS. Because, okay, so, God, this is a deep issue, and it's the way that, okay, so has anybody figured this out? So let's do Istio n dot injection. Let's see. Okay, so the way that it works is that when you're running in a container, we actually set up your resolve conf, which is how DNS works inside of that thing. And then part of that is the default search paths as you're actually looking for services and stuff. And then there's this thing called ndots, which is the number of dots that you look in and how you actually try and how many DNS queries you try based on trying to hunt around to find the right name. That has been changing over time. There was a hint in here that somebody else at least had this error where they got a failed create because failed to call the admission controller webhook, because it wasn't able to call from, it looks like the API server wasn't able to actually get to that service. And so that ends up being the issue. And so it may be that there's a configuration in terms of this. Now, what we're doing is I launched it using Core DNS, which is the newer DNS client for Kubernetes. that kubeadmin has switched over to. I wouldn't be surprised, and I don't think GKE is using core DNS yet. Is it? So I don't think GKE is using core DNS, or maybe it's not. And so that could be the problem that we're actually in. So it's not core DNS. Okay, so it could be that core DNS is slightly different from the way. And so this particular issue that we had here, somebody saying, hey, that should be a valid name, and other people are saying no, that it's not. So this is like dot istio sidecar.istio.service. It could be that it's not resolving that. And I think we were looking at like the, oh man, and like, God, I wish Tim was here because he totally knows this stuff. The Kube API server constructs the service namespace from the mutating webhook configuration. See here and here, that's right. Okay, so it does that. So it assumes that it can actually get there that way. Okay, so let's do something. Kube control. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to install Istio. Oh, that was delete. We're going to apply it. Could it be a cert thing? Because I mean, it could be a cert thing or it could be a timeout thing. So this whole like having to do certs with doing mutating webhooks and stuff like that is a total pain in the butt. Yeah, total pain in the butt, and that's why we need something that actually is below this level, and that's why I think Spiffy could actually play that role, but we're not there yet. Okay, so I'm going to use QuarD, which is my little like demo thing. Oh, and we got an error saying, failed calling admission webhook. I don't want the admission webhook installed here. Post blah, blah, blah. Connection refused. So it wasn't, maybe it's just not up yet. Or no, because, okay, so nothing will launch now because of that. Unless I actually say the disable Istio thing there, because even if you're not doing the injection, it has to actually go through the webhook, so the webhook can do nothing. It has to at least check the annotation to make sure. Yeah, I think so. Part of this, Paul, I think, yeah, we can definitely have one that has Knative deployed and stuff like that. But I think most users are going to be coming at this going like, hey, I want to understand what's happening under the covers here. So that's why I'm actually spending time on this. And, and I'm going to keep going at this because we really haven't had a chance to play with Knative yet. And I think that this does go into the fact that, like, this is a complex beast to install and deploy. Both Istio and Knative are really complex to install and deploy. And so I think that when we're evaluating stuff for Kubernetes, there is the sort of what does it take to actually deploy and maintain this? And then there's what is the user experience on this stuff? And I think the user experience can be great, but we also have to pay attention to making this stuff work and actually being able to maintain it over time. And I think that's the place when you have thousands of lines of YAML, there is this question of how does this evolve over time? Do administrators actually have the insight to actually see what's going on there? So I wanna see if we can get Istio up with the admission controller. Let's see if we can get that up and running. So it's the operator experience, of this stuff. And I think this is one of those things where, I don't wanna read too much into stuff, but like, hey, GKE on-prem will take care of all that for you, which means that who's investing in that experience for folks who are not using GKE? And one of the things that we're really trying to do with Heptio is we're playing a big part in cluster lifecycle, and there have been Googlers that have come and been helping out there and really taking the lead. But it's like we need to make that operator experience work, even if you're not paying somebody to do it, because that's a critical piece for Kubernetes and anything that's building on top of it to be really hit that critical mass where everybody's using the thing. And so, all right, well, shoot. Okay, so this thing is doing that. Now, why wouldn't this be resolving? Let's see, cube control. Now I'm yelling at it. Cube control. Okay, so we get the replica. All right, and oh, wait, now the sidecar injector is running. And then we'll call this, wait, this is pods. Oh gosh, that's right. So this replica set. Okay, so new configuration, blah, blah, blah. There's the template. Was it able to actually register? It doesn't say. But that was, huh. Oh, it got created now. Okay, so is the injector working now? What was happening before? All right, I'm just not gonna, all right, let's go through and, okay. Yeah, so we're moving now. Okay, sorry everybody. So now apply -f. Okay, now we'll apply. Oh, that's the delete. Shoot. Now we're going to actually do. I have to do that at the end. All right, so the ones that we don't have running are Zipkin's not running yet, and the monitoring stuff's not running yet. Build webhook and activator aren't running yet either. All right, so the monitoring stuff's not running. I wonder what's going on there. Okay, it's coming up. Must be downloading. So I don't know what the hell happened there. I don't know why it was failing before, but it turns out deleting and then re-adding it actually worked. It may be that, maybe it's like you're trying to add the admission controller webhook before the service was ready, and then it got in some sort of backup loop, back-off loop or something. So I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, so we got enough going so that we can actually make this stuff work. So I'm going to go back here, and we'll close that. We'll close that. And now it says, okay, let's go ahead, get started with a Knative app deployment. Nobody's told me yet, so this is instructions that are missing here. But if I didn't do the label thing, so we got to do that. Yeah, okay, we can't forget to do that. Okay, so what I just did here is I labeled the default namespace that says anything that any pods that you start here will get the Istio sidecar installed. So Steve, was Istio.yaml applied more than once? It was, but applying a YAML should be idempotent. And so, yeah, so that shouldn't have been an issue, but maybe it was. I don't know. So now if I do the quard cube control port forward quard 808088, will that work? Now if I go to localhost 8080, look at that. I can actually look around and I have stuff running and I can do DNS and it all works. Now, but now what we're going to do is cube control get pod quard. What we'll see here is that this is a much more complicated pod definition than just my stuff. Because like my stuff here is quard. I do have, well, so this is image, blah, blah, blah. Now here's another entry, and the ordering is weird, but this is the sidecar that gets injected, and it has a bunch of command lines, it has a bunch of environment variables. And then we also have an init container that does a whole bunch of stuff to get the proxy up and running. And so when Istio does its injection, it's actually fairly invasive in terms of the way that it goes ahead and puts that sidecar in there. So when people say, oh, it just runs Istio as a sidecar, there's some like deep voodoo going on there as you actually go through this stuff. And so just something to be aware of if you're running with Istio and you start looking at your pod definitions and stuff, you're going to be like, whoa, somebody mucked with this. That was Istio that was mucking with it. Okay. So we got that up and running now. Okay, so now what we're going to do is let's install an app deployment, so we'll get the deployment stuff here. So we have a new object here called service. We're going to call this one service.yaml. And what we're going to be doing here is, yeah, and there's capabilities and stuff to be able to do this. So yeah, so Istio is actually pretty invasive, which is like when I'm like, hey, do we really need Istio? It's like, well, that just adds more complexity to management. It adds more complexity. Now, you get a lot with it, too. It's not like Istio doesn't bring value to the table. I think it's just important to realize that, like, you know, that is actually going to create some, you know, a whole bunch of extra stuff running in your cluster that you have to be aware of. Okay, so metadata, hello world go. So this thing is a thing called a service. Now, what's confusing here is that in Kubernetes, a service is essentially a routing mechanism. And if you read sort of the book that I wrote, Kubernetes Up and Running, I describe service at its core basis form as a named label query. Right? And then you can use that named label query as sort of a service discovery thing and then layer on proxying on top of it, right? And then there's an idea of a service in Istio, which is like its super duper fancy version of a service that actually defers to a Kubernetes service. What's happening here is that, and I believe this, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is that a Knative service is a deployment plus the routing rules, plus perhaps even a build configuration. So it's wrapping up all of that stuff into a single object. Yeah, I haven't applied that YAML yet, Ahmed. And so I think what we're doing here, and I don't know, I mean, this is nested pretty deep, but we have run latest configuration, and we have a revision template. And I don't, and then and so then this is another thing, and I think we do a shitty job of this across Kubernetes, and I haven't read this, but here's a description of the different things. Yeah, so a service manages a route and a configuration which manages revisions. And so it's a combination of ingress plus service plus deployment bundled up into this thing called service. And I think it also does building when we get to that, right? So it's all these things brought together. And what I'd love to see is this stuff broken down a little bit more, because it's like, well, what if I want to use a different thing to build my stuff? Or what if I want to use a different thing to do routing, right? Is there a way that we can actually start breaking this up into sort of finer grained pieces of componentry? So now, and then the other thing, and we do a crappy job of this, is, okay, and this isn't bad, right? But like across Kubernetes is that we're not good at actually having good documentation of our API types, right? If you go like Kubernetes API, and you know, you get to this page here, and you say, well, let me look at the 110 thing. It loads up this huge page. Now, Phil did this page, and it's great. And so I can look at, like, here's service here. And it does talk about, like, a bunch of the things that go into service. But what we end up with is all these sub-objects, because Kubernetes configuration gets pretty nested. And so then you have to click around this stuff all over the place. Oh, and that just goes to API. Yeah, so that's not, and then it just like does this, and the scroll back doesn't work well. And so here we have service, and I can go service spec, which jumps me here. And then I have a bunch of, so like it deeply nested. It's really hard with this documentation to get a feel of sort of like what is actually going on. I think this is better because at least it's something that you can read and it has examples, but we're not good at having canonical documentation around the the YAML that we're actually doing. So okay, so here's service where we have regular old Kubernetes metadata. We have spec run latest versus pinned. Can you have both of these? Is pinned, okay, only one of run latest or pinned can be set in practice. So that's really confusing that it's like, this is really a like, hey, I want to do something, but I only want to run the latest or I want to run a specific revision. But instead of actually having like a type of like run configuration and you say like, well, I want to run latest or I want to run a revision, you actually have to do it by changing this part of it. But I guess these things are, it's the same object, same sub-object there. So that's really confusing to me. Okay, and then we have a build name and then we have a container. What is this container for? Is this the container that I want to run? Yeah, and so then here I can run my containers and stuff. So I actually specify my containers. Oh, there's something called a concurrency model. I wonder what that is. And all right, so that is, but how is that different from the revision? Configuration, okay, so configuration. And then here we have revision template, but I don't see revision template here. So my guess is that this documentation is out of date. So I don't have a good mental map of how revisions relate to run latest, relate to configuration, and how all those things relate together. And how can I, yeah, wow, okay. And then there's status that we definitely get here. So I'm kind of confused. Okay, revision template spec is like pod template spec. Okay, I get that. But what is the model for revisions? Can I actually look at my historic revisions? Is it like deployment where I can see, does it manage a set of, I guess you said like what we're saying here is that if we look, the resource type documentation, configuration records the history of revisions. Does it use that using CRDs, I guess? Okay. So let's apply this and see what we get out of this. Kube control apply -f service.yaml. I didn't save it. Okay, so we have hello world go that's running. So this is a service serving knative.dev is the type called hello world. So if I do kube control get service, all right, and I have to do .serving. Does that work? Okay, so if I just do, because it's called service, when you just do get service with kube control, it gives you Kubernetes services. It doesn't actually give you the Knative services. And so that's one of the implications of reusing the service name here. And then, yeah, and then we do, and then if we just look at the raw YAML here, what we'll see is that we have conditions, which is interesting. So this is similar to like transition time. So it looks like this probably borrows code from like the deployment. We have a domain that this thing is actually hosted on. We have an internal domain. I want to make example.com be tgik.com, observe generation, and then traffic. There's traffic routing that actually says that, hey, we have 100% going to the hello world.go configuration name, but where, and that's a revision name. Okay. Can I actually send this to a different configuration, or is that part of the service? I didn't see name in the configuration. So I'm not sure how this model works here. Fun bugs with the CRD, short names. Yeah, so, okay, and then there's a revision name, but how do I actually, okay, and then there's the latest revisions and stuff like that. So can I do like revision? Oh, look at that, revision, I just guessed that. There we go. So the revision, okay, so the relationship between Knative service to revision is similar from deployment to replica set. So we'll go ahead, but if I do a kube control get pods, I go ahead and I do that. So I have that, kube control, get replica sets. I have that, deployment. Okay, so I mean, maybe you can answer this for me, Matt. Like, why are you all even using like maybe deployments, right? Because deployments help you to do upgrading. That's the value that they bring. But you guys are doing your own upgrading by actually dealing with revision. So you view a revision, I'm assuming, as immutable, and you rotate those things around. So I'm confused why revisions would be managing deployments versus actually just managing replica sets directly. And then I guess you have like maybe extra data on so you want like so I think in some ways the revision becomes a strongly typed thing with a replica set. Yeah, because I'm not it's not clear to me what deployment is bringing to the party. All right, so we have this thing running, which is sweet, and so let me let's map this stuff out here. Yeah, I mean, so the question is like, okay, interesting nuances, user immutable versus operator immutable. Yeah, like people can always go and muck with stuff. I mean, you can write zeros to your, you can dd dev 0 to your SD1, right? And that'll like break your machine. Like, at some point don't do that. So we have here a service, and this manages a revision. And that manages a deployment. And this, can you all see this? It's a little bit bright there. And this manages a replica set. And we finally get down to pod. All right, so I think that's right. Now, yeah. So we're saying rebasing images. Yeah, but I mean, if you're going to change your image, that's a different revision, right? At the end of the day, you probably I mean, the whole idea is that like when you're using deployment, you generally view your replica set as managed by the deployment, and you rarely deal with it directly. Now the service will also manage I assume like the Istio resources. And I don't know those well enough to actually say what it is. It's probably a virtual service and probably gateway stuff and all that. So, and then I also assume that it also manages a Kubernetes service along the way here too. Let's see. Don't DD to your block device. Okay, kube control. If I can spell kube control get service. We do have hello world go here, and that actually is then pointing to the. So yeah, so this manages coordinates a whole bunch of objects across a whole bunch of things, and so. So kube control get all. Does this work now? Oh, look at that! Get all didn't used to actually get CRDs and stuff. Now it apparently gets all. They're not kidding when they say, well, it still doesn't get all. I think there's something you have to do to register. I'm still confused on how this extensibility works because I can still kube control get, I don't think service accounts here. Yeah, so that's not included in all, but a lot of these other ones are. All right, so then we have configuration. Get configuration. What is that? How is configuration different from revision? I'm so confused. Okay. Because kube control get Knative. Does that work? Does that get me all? Oh, look, it gets all the ones with Knative in there. Configuration sits between service and revision. Oh, so there's a configuration here. All right, I got my map here of what's going on. And so this goes here, and then that goes there, and then there we go. So that's what we got going on there. We got a configuration. Excuse my bad handwriting. Okay. And so this is starting with an image that we already have. Now, I would love to see a tutorial about, so we applied this interacting with the app. So now we can actually go through and we'll get the Ingress Gateway and all that. We'll do that. It's not an IP address, it's a CNAME, but node IP, yeah. Okay, so we mentioned that. And then we get the URL for our service. And our echo host URL. Okay, so that's hello-world.go default example.url. Now your friend is confused. He needs help as she works on her math workbook. Yeah. No, I'm figuring this out. Tell her that this is the learning process and we're all figuring this stuff out. So if I go through and I do that, I get a bad URL. What is going on? Curl's not happy with that. Host, echo, IP address. Oh, that's nothing, right? Oh, so this is, what is, this is, it's host name, not IP when you're doing AWS. Host name. So there we do that. Now we have curl. Oh, wait, did that not work? Sorry, host name. Echo IP address. There we go. Okay, yeah. And now if we do the curl, now it should work. Theoretically, maybe. Oh, look, it worked. Now, did that spin up a, that didn't spin up a pod because we already had one running, I think. Oh, it was terminating. So like it wasn't spinning up a pod. So did it scale to 0? Sweet, look at that. Okay, that's really cool. Kube control get pods. I see here, so now we're running, so it actually brings up 3. Is there a way that you can set the minimum when it actually comes down? Or is there a way I can force it to scale to 0 so that I can actually test this out? I'm sure you guys test this stuff all the time. And now if I do this again, it's really fast. We got to keep it alive. We got to juggle it, right? Oh, 3 containers, 1 pod. Okay, that makes sense. Ready, 3, 3. You're right. My bad. Okay. You got to wait 5 minutes now to be able to get it to work. I wish there was a way to sort of force it. Take a few seconds for Knative, scale up your application, and return a response. Okay, that's really cool. All right, so one of the things I want to do here is, and we're going to run out of time. So I feel like we just started scratching the surface of service, but at least we've like gone through enough stuff that like at a future TGIK, we can definitely start digging into the details of this because I still want to know a lot more. Okay, so I can do kube control -n knative serving edit config map config.autoscaler. And oh, look, we have all sorts of tunables here. Panic window, oh, that looks good. Scale to 0 threshold. We're going to make this be 30 seconds. All right, now, do I need to restart the autoscaler to have it pick up this config change? Did I get the right one? I may need to defeat, oh, okay. Okay. Okay, George has to take off pretty soon because he's got kid duty, I believe. So he may be leaving us here because I'm going overtime on this because I wanted to get to the meat of the stuff because we futzed around with Istio for so long. Okay, most things are moving to watching config maps in real time. Yeah, I like that pattern. If you guys got any good libraries for doing that, I think that's the type of thing that's worth breaking out and sharing with folks, because if we move from this world of like, hey, I'm watching something on disk to I'm watching a config map using like Kubernetes native APIs, that'd be a really cool thing. All right, so let me show you all a trick. Kube control -n knative serving get deployments. And we want to change the autoscaler. And then we're going to edit this thing. The way that deployments work is they end up taking a hash over the information that's under in the template. And if that hash changes, they do a redeploy. So we need to make that hash change, but I don't want to actually change any of the real stuff in there. So you can just add an annotation here, which is like kick it, you know, hell yeah. Okay, and so that'll actually kick this thing to be able to actually redeploy the autoscaler. And it probably, yeah, so I think that's done. So now if we do get pods, and we'll probably have to wait 30 seconds. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so while we're waiting for that to scale down again, because I want to see the live scale up again, I felt like I didn't really look at that like we needed to. What I do want to do, and this was one of the things that, I don't know where I saw it, but I did want to did want to do like the custom DNS stuff using a custom domain. Okay, so what we can do here is, okay, so we have to, we're going to change the custom domain here. Okay, so we're example.com. What happens if you have multiple of these? Oh, that's right, you can actually have like, oh, I went blurry. Whoa. I think I was seeing that you can actually say, well, I want to use, you know, for this set of things, I want to use this domain. For this other set of things, I want to use this other stuff. So that's, but I think this apparently is the default. So we're going to use tgik.io is our new default domain. So we went ahead and did that. So there we did minedomain.com. And then you can also do it with a file and override it. So here you can say like, oh, if it says app.prod, I want to do example.org. Now, I don't know where the schema is for this, but like this is one of those things where, and this is one of the things that we're dealing with in Contour. And so Dave Cheney has some really interesting stuff. And I wish that we could use something like Contour with Knative because there's interesting stuff happening in the Ingress world outside of Istio, but Istio doesn't work with other Ingress systems. So I wish we could do that. But one of the things that I think you want to do is you want to say, hey, I want to give this namespace permission to sit on this particular host name, right? So imagine that, you know, you're a company, you're running a multi-team cluster. I know this is your stuff. It has a selector, but you're then programming Istio under the covers. And between you and Istio, there's essentially no way to enforce that, hey, only this namespace can use this particular host name or this part of the URL space. Even if you all actually lock this stuff down, Istio would still let anybody squat on any namespace. And so, you know, what you could do is say nobody else can actually then go ahead and edit Istio rules, right? You could do that with RBAC and say only Knative can edit the Istio rules. So you could go ahead and do that. But now that means that nobody else can deploy anything using Istio unless you use Knative. So Knative essentially becomes a wrapper around this stuff instead of one of many that might be running on top of Istio. And I think that that's a loss for the ecosystem when you can't run these different things side by side, because you may want to do like a batch MapReduce type of thing. That's going to run on top of Kubernetes. Maybe it uses Istio under the covers to do stuff to like expose its data pages. And you can't do that with Knative because these things would actually... and you say, we run our own gateway, I wonder what controls. No, you can't do it with your own gateway because that, you know, Kubernetes RBAC is actually based on URL path, and the gateway doesn't show up in the URL path. And so there's no way to do it based on that gateway. I'm happy to talk about how Contour works, and I would love to actually see if we can get a version of Knative working with Contour. And, you know, if we could do that with Istio, that might be hard. But I think, you know, maybe if Istio were optional, it'd be a lot easier to start plugging into stuff like that. Because that's one of the fundamental things that we're thinking about with Contour is how do we actually deal with multi-team and the policy around who's able to squat on which domain names at which point, right? And so you guys are solving this where it's like, oh, hey, if I have a, you know, example.com and then I have a namespace called my app, right? So you have myapp.example.com, and you want to be able to squat on that. I think that's great that you're providing a default host name, but like, should that be something that's only available to Knative apps? Or should that be something that's available to apps that maybe are using Knative, maybe not? Are there ways that we can break these things down so that there's more reusable pieces? And so that's the thing that I'd really love to see. All right, so but anyways, I want to do this. So like now we have that working. And if I do, okay, so now that changed it. So this is beautiful because I changed that config file and then like boom, everything got fixed up, which is really, really fun. And so now what I can do is if I do the get service, so echo host URL, right? So I have this thing here, and now I can go through and I can go to Route 53 in AWS. And I have tgik.io here. And I can update my CNAME here for this stuff to, oh wait, I copied the wrong thing. Not host URL, it's, what do we call it? Echo IP address, even though it's not an IP address. Okay, so there we're gonna actually go ahead and we're gonna update that. And I want to do like 5 seconds. Yeah, so I have this thing with a really short TTL because we change these things all the time. All right, so now that's updated, but that's star.tgik.io. And so one of the things that we're hitting here is that with DNS, you can do these wildcard records like this typically, but they only go one level deep, right? And so what we end up needing, and this is unfortunate also, is we need a, because we actually have, so this thing ends up being, where was it? Hello world.go/go.default.tgik.io. That DNS record that I just did isn't going to be good enough here, right? So I need to create another record set, which is for star.default.tgik.io. And then here, I'm going to do a CNAME. I'm going to set this up. We're going to go 5 seconds here, and I'm going to create this. And then, yeah, and then you're talking blue-green because that adds yet another level on top of this stuff because you end up with version dot app name dot, you know, and a lot of this is, a lot of this ends up being based on a lot of the experiences for the experience around App Engine. And so, yeah, so I'd love to actually see this do auto DNS with external DNS, and I was going to get to that. I mean, but like, again, like, I don't know, like, and then what we've seen here is that all of this is still plain old HTTP, and you'll notice that Chrome now is nice enough to, like, when we do this, to show, like, hey, you're not running secure. So we need to do TLS, and the TLS story with Istio is actually really weak right now also. There's no support for Cert Manager, which is generally the accepted way for doing Let's Encrypt with Kubernetes. Cert Manager in Istio is really, you know, some rough going to be able to do that. You can do Cert Manager to do certificates with the DNS challenge, but doing the HTTP challenge, Cert Manager doesn't know how to program Istio ingress routes. So, yeah. So that's a little bit tricky here. But anyway, so now we have default.tgik.io. If we go to, if we go and let's go through and click this, and oh, site cannot be reached. Name not resolved. Oh no, I screwed up. Now I'm going to have to. So star.default.tgik.io. Did I not wait long enough? Star.default.tgik.io. Oh, I CNAMEd it to itself. I'm an idiot. Okay. I want it to go here. Okay, we're going to have to wait 5 seconds. Hopefully nobody's caching it longer than that. Oh, I don't want to do the dig. Doesn't know about HTTP. Silly rabbit. For DNS, a single wildcard should be good enough. SSL certs are only for a single level. No, DNS doesn't go deep, I don't think. I think it's only the first level, my understanding is. I mean, I could be wrong. All right, so now we got that resolved. And we go, hello world, go.sample.v1. So yeah, so we're saying not secure here because I am running the new Chrome that now says that anything in HTTP is not secure. Yeah, Pablo, I don't have Helm Killer installed right now, so I can't do Helm. Yeah, so okay, so we got that going. So that's one of the things that gets tricky is that you have to set up DNS. And as you set up DNS, you have to do it for each namespace. And then as we start doing further, like, so either, I mean, one of the things that we could do here is that we could run a DNS server on cluster that actually knows how to like populate these things on demand. That might be good for developer scenarios where you're going to have this deep stuff. And then actually you can use DNS for sort of real host names for production stuff. So that may be a good way to go here also. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so I'm going to actually call it here. I didn't get through nearly as much stuff as I really wanted to here. And I think a big part of that was, you know, the hiccups that we hit with the admission controller and getting that stuff up and running. I'm not sure what happened there, to be honest. It could be those duplicate values in YAML, and maybe those things are non-deterministic. And when you have those duplicates, and I deleted the wrong one, and then when I reapply, I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. So we definitely have that. George, thank you so much for helping out. But let me wrap up my thoughts on what I see so far. I see. So Brendan has the award right now. All right. Okay. So thoughts on Knative. So Knative on top of Istio, that's a pretty tall stack. Istio brings a lot of power, but it brings actually a lot of complication on top of it also. And I think this is something that we got to be aware of. It brings value, and I think I like the problems that Istio is solving. I think it does make this stuff be that much harder from an operational experience to figure out what's going on. It demos well, right? The dashboards look awesome. We didn't get into the dashboards. I'd love to see the install story. Like Knative itself is broken up into these different components, whether you're talking the server versus the build versus the eventing stuff. I think that that's great that they're viewing it as a bunch of sort of building blocks that work well together. I like projects, and I think if you looked at the Kubernetes API, you know, there's these Voltron moments where you say you have all these different things that come together, and then all of a sudden they add up to something that integrates well. But each of those things in sort of like on their own can add a lot of value. And so I'd love to see more of this sort of Voltron come out with Knative so that we can have a larger ecosystem of things working together. Like, can I, you know, the fact that the build stuff is built into the service thing bothers me a little bit, because I think like I'd love to see the auto scaling down to 0 along with the assumptions around how requests are done and all that stuff, which we didn't dig into. I'd love to see that separated from the building, right? And maybe from some of the, well, you have to have something for the service hookup to be able to, well, maybe we don't, right? I'd like to think like, is there a way for us to actually have scale to 0 without having to take a dependency on Istio or Ingress in any way, right? Or maybe layering on the auto DNS stuff in a way on top of this. And it's like, and it's, you know, and we have, you know, a really deep hierarchy of objects that are being managed here. So like, I'm reticent to say, let's go ahead and add more objects here. But I also feel like these things are more coupled than they necessarily perhaps need to be. And so that's something that I'm definitely looking at also. Yeah, so I think that that's great. And I think, you know, and just to be, I think in terms of the Voltron moment, I definitely see a lot more of that with Knative than I see with Istio. Because Istio does a bunch of stuff. It'll do security, it does ACLing, it does routing, it does metrics, it does a whole bunch of stuff. But I know that there's parts and there's ways that you can tease this apart and use just some of the stuff, but not other of the stuff. What I haven't seen are great examples, and it you know, in terms of how you actually do that in a way where you can start extending it with things that are not sort of like thought about from the start. And I think that's, for me, that's one of the things that has been the most exciting about Kubernetes, is that you see people come and start reusing the primitives in ways that we never thought about from the get-go. That is, I think, is super, super exciting. And to do that, you have to have these things loosely coupled. And so I see the beginnings of that with Knative, and I'd like to see even more of that. And I'd like to see that sort of building block type up a thing separate from the sort of the whole experience. You need both of those. You need a great end user experience, and it's clear that was the first goal here. But I'd also like to see those building blocks actually work together well too. All right, so I'm going on there. I love what I'm seeing. I think it looks really, really interesting. The scale to zero stuff is just so sweet. So like, let's see if we can do that again before. Let me switch back to the screen. I want to see this happen one more time here. Cube control get pods. Okay, so they're not running. And watch -n 0.5. So we're updating this every half a second here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the hello world, do a reload, go back, and look at that. They're initting, pod initializing, running. And it completed. Oh, that's so sweet. That's super, super cool. All right, so thank you everybody who joined me. I'm sorry we went way over, this went long. We hit a bunch of those hiccups with Istio. I definitely want to do more episodes on Knative. I want to dig into what's going on there. I feel like I just scratched the surface. So look forward to future episodes here. Probably not next week. I think I got kid duty also. So thank you again, everybody, and thanks for watching. Please hit the like button and stay tuned for more in the future.